Well, hello there. This is Cliff Cerces, and I'm coming to you again with another edition of Music and the Word with the Cerces. And believe it or not, right now as you're hearing this broadcast, as far as I know, I'm in the faraway Amazon jungle in the rainforest of a little village called Zavalo. To get there from the capital of Ecuador, which is Quito, you have to travel 9 hours with stops over the Andes Mountains, 19,500 feet in the air. That's almost 4 miles. And then you have to go into a canoe and travel for 3 hours at a high speed in the canoe with an outboard motor to get to the village. What are we doing there? Well, we're installing a water system, bringing water 3 miles through the jungle to the village and then purifying the water with a water treatment plant. And we'll be talking more about that when we get back. As far as I know, that's where I am right now. Of course, I pre-recorded this program. And so we're going to bring you a program that we did several months ago telling you about a story in Ecuador. But first of all, here's a mission song that the children learn very, very young in life. You've sung it when you were a kid. This Little Light of Mine.
Shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, oh yes, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, oh yes, Jesus gave me the light, now I'm gonna let it shine, Jesus gave me the light, I'm gonna let it shine, Jesus gave me the light, now I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, oh yes, don't let Satan blow it out, I'm gonna let it shine, don't let Satan blow it out, I'm gonna let it shine, don't let Satan blow it out, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, oh yes, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, oh yes, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Next comes what I believe to be probably the best missionary song ever written. We love to sing it. And it's been a while since we have. We need to kind of get back and sing this song again because it's a great, great mission story. After this, we're going to go back to a program we did a few months ago where we're talking about a great story of forgiveness that happened in Ecuador. And you'll hear it just as we did the broadcast a few months ago. But here is Jesus Saves.
The joyful sound, Jesus saves, Jesus saves. So let's spread the tidings all around. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Let's bear the news to every land. Let's climb the steeps and let's cross the waves. Onward 'tis our Lord's command. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Wafted on the rolling tide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. And let's tell it to sinners both far and wide. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Save the islands of the sea. Come on and echo back all you ocean caves. Earth shall keep her jubilee. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Sing above the battle strife. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Thine is death and endless life. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Singing softly through the gloom, when the heart for mercy craves, singing triumph for the tomb. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Give the winds a mighty voice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. And let all the nations of the whole earth rejoice. Jesus saves, Jesus saves. Shout salvation full and free. Highest hills and deepest caves. Here's our song of victory. Jesus saves, Jesus saves, Jesus saves, Jesus saves.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our music. Interesting broadcast today. I'm going to tell a story. It's about the country of Ecuador in South America. And this story is one that's 62 years in the making for me. I'm 67 years old. If you told me a year ago that I'd be doing this broadcast and that I would be telling this story, I would have not believed such a thing would have happened. But what an incredible 6 months I've had. And let me explain that probably around February or March, my friend Dave Colonin called me and said, hey, on my radio broadcast tonight, I'm going to be telling a great story of forgiveness, and I'm going to be telling a story that you never heard. You have never heard this story before because it happened many, many years ago when you were too young to know it. Listen in and listen to this story. You won't believe the story I'm going to tell tonight. So I tuned in and I listened to his story, and I called him the next morning and I said, Dave, I've known that story since I was 5 years old. And he said, how's that possible? I said, because the story you told last night was about my cousin, my distant cousin. My family is related to the man that you were talking about in your story. Well, that just amazed him. And he began to share with me how his burden was to go and bring necessary clean water to a village in Ecuador. And he was just so possessed by, and I mean that in a good way, he had such a burden on his heart to bring this clean water to this village. And when he found out, he said, I've been praying about who's going to go with me. And you're related to missionaries that I even talked about on the radio last night in Ecuador. That answers the question. You're one of the people going with me. He didn't really so much ask me as to tell me I was going to go. And I was delighted. You say, well, what story is that? Well, let me explain. On January 8th, 1956, 5 missionaries flew into a little area in Ecuador that was later called Palm Beach. They had for weeks been flying in and been dropping gifts to the natives there. It was a tribe of Aucan Indians that had never heard the gospel before, and they were very, very savage people. The word was that it was too dangerous to go to this tribe because they were afraid that people would be killed. In fact, they had found evidence just miles away from where they thought that their little village was, that some folks had been murdered, and they thought that it was these Indians that were not reachable by white missionaries that these were the ones that had done it. And so they started flying in the plane, these missionaries. And while their families were safe behind, over around the Shelmera area that the Shell Oil Company was exploring for oil, they flew over looking for any way they could find out where is this village. And finally they found it. And so they devised a system where they could drop a bucket on a rope, and they've ingeniously came out with a way that they could circle in such a way that by centrifugal force they could keep that bucket centered in one spot, so that though the plane was circling, the rope was so long, they had that bucket just about to the ground, and they started to send gifts. And they would send gifts to these people week after week to show that they were friendly. Well, pretty soon they were shocked at what happened. They roasted a monkey, and they put that monkey in the bucket, and they sent that roasted monkey back as a gift to those missionaries in the plane. And then they took a exotic bird, kind of like a parrot or a toucan. I'm not sure exactly what it was, kind of like a parrot, I guess it was. And they put that live bird in there as a present. And so communication was starting to happen between these people. And the pilot, Nate Saint, 32 years old, the oldest of those 5 missionaries, he thought, if I can find a place to land the plane somewhere near that village, we can go down and we can make contact. And so he searched and he searched and he searched, and he finally found a sandbar where it was possible that he could land the plane. And they did. And the 5 missionaries went down there. Nate Saint, who was 32 years old, Roger Udarian, who was 31, Jim Elliott and Ed McCulley, they were both 28 years old. And the youngest guy on the team was Pete Fleming. He was 27. And these 5 young men, only 5 years apart in age, 32 to 27 years old, they went down there. And they were just landed that little yellow plane, and they said, we want to see if they'll come out and talk to us and if they'll greet us, because we are the people that they know in this yellow plane have been dropping all these gifts, and they've given us gifts too. We've shown ourselves to be friendly, and we've prayed, Lord, help us to come here with the message of the gospel. Help us to be able to let these people know that there's a Jesus that cares about them. Let them know, Lord, that you have a claim on their life and that you can do something that can change their life. And they hung around for a while, and pretty soon here comes a young man and 2 young ladies with him. And he was a cheerful guy, and really he was kind of a character. He was a rascal. And they just put a name on him. They said, we're going to call him George. And so they called him George. And he kept motioning to the plane. He wanted to go up in the plane. So finally they put him in the plane, and they took up and they circled around, and George got his first ride in the plane. Man, he looked down at all the people that were there, all the tribes people that were down there, and he said, man, they're so small. They're so little compared to that. And oh, he had a ball when he got out of that plane, just laughing and laughing about how funny that was, that all his friends looked so small and tiny from up in that plane. And they gave him some food to eat, and he was eating a sandwich. And there's video of this because they took some film, and then they went back to their post, and they brought that film back with them, and they brought back notes, and they reported to their families what had happened. So some of the film that they took, color film that was later was incorporated into a movie that came out in 1961 called Through Gates of Splendor. I first saw it in 1964 when I was 13 years old. It was the first time I saw that film. I've got a copy of it now. I've got 4 or 5 different movies that were made about the event that I'm about to tell you about that took place. Listen to this story. It's amazing. They seemed to be getting along so friendly with these natives, and they wanted to tell them about Jesus. Well, for their protection, when they came back, of course, and as I said, they had took some movie film, and that movie film had found its way back to their homes. So that film existed after the tragedy that I'm about to describe to you. But on January 8th of 1956, They went back and they were hoping to have a little church meeting about 4:30. We know that because on a little pad, Nate Saint, the pilot and the lead missionary, wrote on this little pad, I'm hoping that everybody comes back at 4:30 because we want to have a little church service and worship the Lord with them and see if we can have some kind of a meeting here with these natives down here. We want to tell them about Jesus. Now, they did have guns with them. They were carrying guns. There could have been wild beasts and anything else, but their purpose in having those guns and those firearms were not to fire them at the natives. They weren't going to kill the natives. The question was asked of them before they left. If you get in trouble with these people, they may be savages. We've heard that they are. If you get in trouble, are you going to shoot them and kill them to save yourself? And the missionaries said, no, we can't do that. And they were asked why. And they said, well, it's very simple. Listen to this answer. Listen to this. It's very simple. Because we're ready to meet Jesus. And they're not. If they were to kill us, we would go and be with Jesus. But if we were to kill them before they know about Jesus and they have a chance to understand the message of salvation, we could take their lives and we could cause them to go into an eternity without Jesus. We would rather lay down our own lives than to allow that to happen. Wow. Well, isn't it Jesus that said, greater love hath no man than this, that a man would give his life for his friends? And they purposed, we will not defend ourselves. If we get in trouble, we will not defend ourselves by killing the natives. We will allow ourselves to be killed first because we are not going to send them into an eternity without God. And things seem to be going along wonderfully. The natives seem to, they accepted the gifts and things just seem to be going along real fine. But then all of a sudden, as they were there by the airplane, all of a sudden, here comes George, and here comes a couple young ladies, and the ones that they had met earlier, and they come down by the plane, and so they said, okay, well, this is going to be good. Then we have a little bit of a welcoming committee, and that kind of distracted them, and all of a sudden, out of the woods came these Ecuadorian warriors with spears. They would use spears for their hunting. And they came out with spears, and they speared all 5 of those missionaries to death. The first one was Nate Saint, the pilot. And then one by one, the men killed the other 4. Why would they do such a thing? What in the world was the motivation behind why they would turn on these people that were trying to be so good to them? Why would they kill them like that? And then they ripped apart the plane. They destroyed it. They ripped the fabric off of it. They literally disassembled much of it and buried it. Well, they have been keeping in contact by radio with Marge Saint, that's Nate Saint's wife, back at the compound and back at their house. And all of a sudden, when it was time for a radio message in, no radio message came. And that was of such great concern. Why wasn't there a message? Why didn't anything come across? Why didn't anything come across as a message saying everything is fine, we're okay? And they heard nothing. So finally a search party was sent out. And Life magazine had heard of this. It hit the news. It was a big news story here in the United States and probably around the world at that time. Everybody was saying, what happened to those 5 missionaries? We haven't heard from them. What has happened? And then Life magazine commissioned a famous photographer to go down there with his camera to take pictures, and they sent reporters down there, and the government came down with helicopters and flew the helicopters down to there, and out of that helicopter came people with rifles looking all around to find out what had happened. And we know now that the people that had done this, they were in the woods. They're peering out of the woods, looking at what had happened. They say, oh, we are in trouble. We are in trouble. We have done something that has gotten the attention of the government. We are going to be in trouble over this. And they hid. And they went and they found the bodies. They found notes that had been written by them beforehand. They found little pieces of the plane. They found all but one of the bodies, and then later they found another one downstream. And they came back. They took pictures. Life magazine at the time came out with a big, gigantic story with pictures and everything else of what had happened down there at the place that they now called Palm Beach down in Ecuador. And so the whole country talked about it. Everybody knew about it. Everybody talked about it. If you were a Bible college student or you were going to a church at that time that had any ties to any kind of missionary activity, and you were around in 1956, you know about the 5 missionaries that were killed in Ecuador. Well, I said that I knew about this since I was 5 years old. How is that possible? Well, you see, Nate Saint, his brother's name is Dan. His sister's name is Rachel. Now, Rachel Saint was a veteran missionary who was stationed not that far away from this place, and she actually was high up on the missions board or on the missionary hierarchy in a place of leadership. And so Nate's sister was one of the very, very main missionaries that overlooked this area or this region of Ecuador. And she had told her brother Nate, you be very careful. You be very careful. Do not try to make contact with them. And he knew if I tell them what we're planning to do, they're going to put a requirement on us and they're going to force us and they're going to say, we forbid you to go. So he didn't tell. But he told his young 5-year-old son, Steve. Steve Saint knew what happened. He told Steve. And Steve was very worried. And so he went out on the radio and he called his Aunt Rachel, Nate's big sister. And he said, I want you to tell me, how do you say in the Wadani language that they speak, how do you say, I want to be your friend? And she said, why do you want to know that, Stevie? Well, I just want to know. She said, your dad's not planning to go there, is he? And Steve wouldn't answer. He said, I just want to know in that language, how do you say, I want to be your friend? And she taught Stevie how to say that. Well, how in the world would Aunt Rachel know how that language was if there was no contact? Well, there was one contact. Let me explain what happened. Several years earlier, there was a young girl, and this young girl was in trouble with some folks in the tribe, and she ran away. This young girl had a brother whose name was Mikinyani. Remember that name, Mikinyani. This young girl had a brother named Mikinyani, and this young girl ran away, and she found herself among the Shelmira oil exploration folks. And they found her, and they took her, and they brought her to the missionary. And so this young lady found her way to Rachel Saint. And so she was from that tribe. Well, Rachel Saint, Nate's big sister, said, we want you to teach us the language of your people. So little by little, this girl that ran away, she began to teach Rachel what that language was, until Rachel was starting to understand that, because she wanted to go and translate the scriptures into their language. So one day, if contact could be made, they would be able to give the scriptures to them. Well, listen to this. Young Stevie, 5 years old, the son of the pilot, Nate Saint, he says, Aunt Rachel, teach me how to say, I want to be your friend. And she taught him how to say it. And then the father was going to go. he was going to go on one more trip. And as he's getting ready to go, young Stevie walks up to him and says, "Dad, listen, if you get in trouble, let me teach you how to say this little phrase. Say it after me." "What does that mean, Steve?" He says, "Well, it means in that language, I want to be your friend." And he said, "How did you find that out? Were you talking to your Aunt Rachel? Did she get that from that native girl that escaped and came that way?" "Well, yeah, but why did you tell her?" I said, "Let me just tell you, Steve," he said, "if you get in trouble, remember that phrase, I want to be your friend." And he taught them how to say it in their language. Well, when those tribesmen came out and they started to kill them, the first person that they speared was the pilot, Nate Saint. And as he was being speared, he fell to his knees, and we had the account, and I will explain later how we know what had happened, but we got the account later that as he did, he looked up at the person that speared him in the abdomen, and he had just moments before he was going to die, and he looked at him and he said in his own language, "I want to be your friend." And the account is that the person that speared him was struck back by that, but the damage had already been done. And the other people were there. The other tribesmen were working at getting the other 4 missionaries killed, and pretty soon they were all gone. Why would they do such a thing? It was years before the family ever found out, and they did not know for the longest time. But Nate has a brother whose name is Dan. I told you about his sister, his older sister, Rachel. He's got a younger brother named Dan. Dan is married to my cousin. I've known Dan Saint my whole life. And our family has a family reunion. They used to have it every Labor Day. And they used to have it on the New Jersey-Pennsylvania border. And 1956 was an interesting year. When it got to be Labor Day, by that point, I was 5 years old too. Just like Stevie Saint, the son of the pilot Nate Saint. And Dan came to the family reunion. And everybody had seen the Life magazine article. They've read the accounts. They read what the government people said. They saw the pictures. That was something that was very common at that time. Everybody saw that. But Dan had talked to Marge Saint, the wife of Nate, had talked to Elizabeth Elliott. Well, how would they know more? Well, when the government people came back, and they came back to the compound, all the missionaries gathered at one house. And the government people came in and told them exactly what they found. Some of the information that never found its way to the Life magazine article. And they said, "We want to hear it all. We want to know it all. Tell us everything you can tell us." And so these government people, these soldiers, they told the family exactly what they found. And they know that it was these men. They came back with Nate Saint's watch. They came back with the little papers from his pad that he had written about the 4:30 meeting they were hoping to have, and it was his handwriting. They came back with all of these things. And so Elizabeth Elliott, the wife of Jim Elliott, one of those missionaries, Marge Saint, the sister-in-law of Dan Saint, they all got this information, and Dan went investigating. He contacted them. Dan said, "I want to know." Nate's brother Dan said, "I want to know everything," and they told him. And I remember that day. I can picture it in my mind. Labor Day, 1956. I know where I was sitting at a picnic table. I can picture where I was, and I can picture Dan at a picnic table just beyond where I was, and he had his leg up on the table and had his arm across his leg. And he was leaning on the table, and he's telling the story, and he's crying as he's telling it. And I looked over, and my mother was crying. My father was crying. My grandma and grandpa, they were crying. My aunts and uncles were crying. And you know, it wasn't too long before young Cliff was crying too. I knew a very, very bad thing had happened. Do you know I started school the very next day? The next day was my first day of school in kindergarten. And the heaviness of that information, that story, it went with me to school that next day. I realized that a horrible thing had happened to my family. I did not understand more about it until 1964, when I first saw that 1961 film Through Gates of Splendor that showed George and those two women that came down to the plane, and all that stuff was happening, and they were so friendly. They were so friendly, it appeared, with the missionaries. How in the world could such a thing happen? Well, it was years before the story came out. But the rumor was that white people were cannibals and that they ate people. And when Mick and Yanni's sister, when she had an adverse situation with some people in the tribe, and she was afraid she was going to be killed, and years before she ran and left, they know that she got as far as the white people from the Shelmira oil exploration folks, because they were hiding in the woods, and they saw that she ran to them, and they took her with them, and they thought, we don't know what's happened. She has not yet come back. I wonder what's happened. Well, we know that when George and these two women came up and were talking with Nate and the other missionaries, and they were babbling, we know now that they were asking in their tongue, where's, I forget her name, but the name of the girl, where is so-and-so, where is so-and-so? But it was so hard to understand, and they talked so fast, they didn't understand the question they were asking. If they only understood, they knew that that girl had escaped and had gone and was safe with Nate's older sister. But they never understood the question was being asked. Now, this is kind of delicate. I'll tell you exactly what happened. The young man that they called George, he had two wives. And one of these other gals that went down to the plane, he had a desire for her, and he wanted to make her wife number 3. But she had a brother that was absolutely against it, because he did not like the way that George treated his first 2 wives. And he made it clear, you are not going to marry my sister. My sister will not be your wife. But George had designs on her. Well, they came back from the plane, and they, all of a sudden, the 2 of them were found in the woods in a remote area by the brother. And the brother said, what are you 2 doing here? Why are you here in the woods? And real quick, George said, we were chased here by those 5 people with the plane. They told us that they ate Mick and Yanni's sister. They're cannibals. They ate Mick and Yanni's sister. And they wanted to eat us. And they chased us. And they chased us in the woods. And that's why we're here. We were running to get away from them. Well, that wasn't true at all. George said that to cover the fact that he wasn't supposed to be with that young lady the way that he was. And so he made up that story. Why were the 2 of them there in seclusion? What were they doing over there? Oh, we just were running away. Well, the story went back to Mick and Yanni, the older brother of the girl that had disappeared, saying that she had been eaten by the white men. And so they all talked about, what are we going to do? And they said, we're going to protect our village. We're going to make sure that these people don't come in and eat our people. And so when they went out with their spears to kill them, their purpose in killing them, we found out years later, was to protect themselves, because they believed that they were cannibals and they'd already killed one of their tribe, because the guy that was named George by the missionaries, he said it happened. He said this is exactly what happened. Well, things didn't go well for the tribe after that, and Mick and Yanni kept believing that the spirits were against him, and that there were certain things that had happened that the deities that he worshipped were against him, because he said, we've done something that was really improper. He did not feel good about what they had done. But then, all of a sudden, the young girl that was found in the woods with George was found to be with child. And then they were really upset, and they called them over there. And then the girl said, hey, don't you take it out on me. And she said, George made the whole story up and forced me to go along with it. Those men never said anything about eating Mick and Yanni's sister. George made that up. And they never said anything about you were going to eat us. They never chased us in the woods. We were in the woods fooling around. And so George just said that we were there because we got chased by them. Those people did nothing wrong. They treated us wonderfully. And George forced me to say that. Do you know what happened? The tribe killed George for having done that and bringing what they felt was a curse upon their people. And Mick and Yanni said, we have done something wrong. We have done something wrong. Well, the story goes on because the wife of one of the men, Jim Elliott, 28 years old, is one of the men that died. And his wife, Elizabeth Elliott, she started to pray and she said, God, please send someone to those people. Lord, we want to forgive. We want to forgive them for what they did. Lord, would you send somebody? Would you send somebody in there to please let them know that you love them and that you can forgive them, and I will forgive them. I forgive them for what they've done. I don't know why they did it, because the explanation of why it happened had never come out yet. But she began to pray and say, Lord, please let the message go to them. Nobody went with the message. Finally, she said, Lord, I know this is impossible, but I'm even willing to go myself, if that's what it takes to get this message across. Well, to make a very long story short, the situation came about where all of a sudden, that young girl that had escaped came in contact with Elizabeth Elliott and stayed in her house. Rachel Satan allowed that girl to come and find her way, and Elizabeth Elliott was taking care of this native girl that had escaped from the tribe several years earlier. And pretty soon she taught her to speak English, and she accepted the Lord as her Savior. She became a Christian, and she said, you know what? I've got to go back. I've got to go back to my people. Elizabeth, they need to know about Jesus, and I need to go. So she went back. And when she went back, they all saw that she was fine. She had not been eaten. At first, they could not even accept the fact that it was really her. They said, it must be a spirit. We can't believe it's really you. But pretty soon they realized it really was her. And she began to tell them that she's living with the wife and family of one of the missionaries that they had killed, and that they have said, we forgive you. And we want to minister to you. And they want to tell you about someone named Jesus. And they said, we can't understand that. And he says, well, you know, you spared their husbands. But the young girl explained there was one, a Father God, and his own son was spared. And even though his son was spared, he forgave. And people that follow him, they forgive too. And I want Elizabeth and her young daughter to come here and tell you about this man, Jesus, this son, and what he can do for this tribe. And finally they said, that's all right with us. We will accept her if she will come. And would you believe that she went back and she went to Elizabeth Elliott, the widow of Jim Elliott, who was slain, and she said, they are willing to allow you to come. They want to know about Jesus. and they can't believe that you'd forgive them. Would you come? And so Elizabeth took her young 9 or 10-year-old daughter, and the two of them made the hazardous journey, and they came there and stayed there for some time and told them about Jesus and made them understand that they forgave them. Mick and Yanni, he didn't know how to handle that. He had a real problem with that, but it's then that Elizabeth understood and was told the reason why their husbands were slain. That they were told about how the person that made up that false story, it cost him his life. And they told him how the false story had caused them to think they were protecting their village because they think they had come there to kill them. And then she understood. And they were so sorry. Well, there was another warring tribe that kept coming and trying to bring all kinds of war against them. And you know that hardly anybody in that tribe ever lived long enough to be a grandfather, because the men died young because of the warring that went on between these tribes that killed each other, these warring tribes. And Elizabeth Elliot began to teach them that God doesn't want any killing. That God says that when you're not protecting yourself, there is to be no killing. And one man believed that. He helped them build a thatched hut. And he came under the scrutiny, he came under the criticism of other people in the village because they said, this is not right. This man is getting weak. He's got to stay strong as a warrior because he needs to be strong so we can defend ourselves against this other tribe that keeps trying to make war against us. But the man said, I've accepted Jesus. He eventually became the pastor of that tribe. And he said, I'm not going to fight. I am not going to allow myself to be in a situation where I'm going to be involved in the killing. It's not going to happen. Wow. And they ridiculed him, but little by little they saw a change in his life. And they began to realize that something really had happened. And this confused Mick and Yanni. It confused him so much. And then one day, Marge Saint, Nate Saint's wife, came back, and she brought little Stevie Saint. And when he got there, Mick and Yanni immediately recognized who he was. Well, how would he know? In the airplane, there was, by the little cockpit, there was a little picture, a little 5-year-old Stevie in a little cowboy outfit with a cowboy hat on it. And Mick and Yanni later explained how when he saw that picture, after the people were dead, he went into that plane, and all of a sudden, he heard voices coming from the plane, and it confused him. But they were trying to reach them on the radio, and they heard these voices coming over the radio, and he heard this little boy's voice, this little boy calling on the radio, trying to find his daddy. And as he heard that voice that day, he looked up, and he saw that little picture. And he took that picture and remembered what it looked like. And when Stevie, just a short number of years later, showed up there and Mick and Yanni saw him, he right away knew this was the son of the pilot that was killed, the one that flew that yellow airplane. And they became friends. And finally, Mick and Yanni was led to the Lord. And Steve went back. They wanted him to stay, but Steve went back. Mick and Yanni never told him that he was one of the men that had killed the missionaries. But then one day, years later, after Steve was involved in business and had a company he was working with and everything, Aunt Rachel, his aunt, passed away. She had been working there and in other mission fields, but she passed away. And Steve made one more trip. He came back to that Palm Beach area, back to that tribe where now Mick and Yanni's a little bit older. And he comes back there, and he's now in his 30s. And they say to him, would you come here and live with us? Would you live among us like your dad wanted to? We need you here. And he said, I can't do that. My wife and family are back home. I've got a business back home. There's no way in the world that I can do that. I'm sorry, but that's not even possible. But they said, we want you to come. Who was talking to him? The man that had helped build that thatched roof hut for Elizabeth. The man who became the pastor. He said, please. And he said, it's difficult for me to do that because my father was speared here. And the pastor said to him, you don't understand. Almost every one of the men my age had their fathers speared to death at one time. You won't hardly find anybody my age in this village whose father was not speared to death. So we know how you feel, and you should know how we feel. Your father tried to start something. Why don't you come here and finish it? Steve went back and prayed about it, and eventually, would you believe that he took his wife and family, and they moved there and spent quite some time in mission work there. And he and Mick and Yanni became such great friends. But then one day, Mick and Yanni, his conscience was bothering him so bad. And he said, come and get in this canoe. I need to show you something. And so they got in the canoe and they rowed up the river and they came to a place where there was a large sandbar. Steve had never been there before. And he came over and he said, Mick and Yanni, why are you bringing me here? And went over and found a rock that he could use to scrape and started to scrape and scrape and scrape until all of a sudden he dug enough that all of a sudden Steve saw yellow. He saw the yellow remains of his father's airplane that had been buried. And he said, Mick and Yanni, how did you know where this thing happened? And Mick and Yanni went and took a spear, and he handed it to Steve. And Mick and Yanni took the spear, and he held the spear against his chest, the pointed end, and put the other end in Steve's hands. And he said, Steve, I was the one who speared your father. I speared your father. I thought they were going to kill us. It was me. All these years I've been your friend, but I never could tell you I was the one who killed your father. So I've taken this spear and I've put it in your hands, and I'm not going to resist. You need to avenge your father's death. We've come out here to the place where your father died. Take that spear and go ahead and ram it through me, and you kill me to get vengeance on your father. That's how it has to be. I need to pay for what I did. Kill me. Steve began to cry, and he took that spear, and he threw it in the water, and he said, you did not kill my father. My father laid down his life for you. He could have taken the guns and they could have shot you, but you weren't ready to meet Jesus, and they were. You didn't take their lives. They laid their lives down for you. I'm not going to take your life. You're my friend. What a bond. Would you believe how many times Steve Saint brought Mick and Yanni back to the States? Took him around and showed him how we shop, showed him what the cities are like, began to have him come to a house here in the States. He forgave him completely. They remained the best of friends, even greater friends. And Mick and Yanni began to understand more so than ever what it means to forgive and to be forgiven. We talked about it several weeks ago when Jesus told Peter, don't just focus on forgiving someone 7 times a day, but 70 times 7. Well, you couldn't possibly keep count of that. You'd lose track. That's the point. Forgiveness is not about keeping score. Forgiveness is about losing count Let me say that again. Forgiveness is not about keeping score. Forgiveness is about losing count. Even as Stephen of old, the first martyr, said, Lord, lay not this sin to their charge. Even as Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Steve Saint forgave. Steve's 67 today. Reached out to his company, and he just sent me some beautiful books. He's a great author. Just got some books, and I've gotten some videos. You want to see a great movie? It was released on January 20th, 2006, with a $10 million Hollywood budget. It's called The End of the Spear. For Mick and Yanni and for Stephen Saint, that day it was the end of the spear. Mick and Yanni was at the end of the spear, but the end of there being any spearing happened as that spear was thrown by Steve in the water. What a great movie. It was released just a week and a half after the 50th anniversary of when those 5 men lost their lives. So I first heard some of this story, all that was known about it, back on Labor Day in 1956, when Nate's brother Dan, with tears running down his face, told the story to we that were crying as we heard it. Ecuador has always been a place of fascination to me. Never thought I was going to get a chance to go there, but Dave Colon, my friend, said, hey, come with me to Ecuador. We found a village. It's only about 100 miles from where Nate Saint and the other 4 missionaries lost their lives. And they're drinking impure water, and they're sick. And we have found about a water purification system that can be brought there. And there's a lake that if we can figure out a way to pipe water 3 miles from that lake to that village and purify it, we can give them pure, clean water. I just spent 3 days in Indiana at the premier, New Life International, the premier company that makes the finest water purification system for the mission field possible. They've already installed 3,900 units in over 83 countries. How good are they? Well, today, the day I'm recording this broadcast, a truck left for Franklin Graham's Samaritan's Purse to bring a shipment of them there, because Samaritan's Purse only goes first class. And that's the water purification system that they're using to bring to various mission fields. And so, Dave Colon and myself and 2 other friends, we just went through 3 days of training. We learned some very interesting things that I did not know. I did not know that contaminated water is such a problem on the mission field that even though they tell us to drink, how many glasses of water a day? 6 to 8 glasses of water a day? In those tropic climates, would you believe that most of the people do not drink more than 1 or 2 ounces of water a day? 1 to 2 ounces of water a day, and they're very, very dehydrated as a result. Well, of course, in a tropic hot climate. Well, what's the cure for that? To drink water, but they can't drink more water. It's the water that makes them sick if they drink too much. And the parents tell their children, do not drink water, sip it. Take very little. You can't live healthy without water. What a privilege God has given us. In just days, weeks, we're going there to look the situation over. We have to bring some of the stuff from the United States. We have to buy some of it in the capital city of Quito, Ecuador, because some of the materials we can't put on a plane. We're going to have to go there. How are we getting there? We're traveling 7 hours by truck from Quito, from the airport, 7 hours by truck to the river, and then we're getting in a boat for the last 3 hours of the journey. And then we walk half a mile to get to the village. And they're so excited because they know they're going to have clean water. And we know that Jesus, he met the physical needs of people. When he got their attention with having met their physical needs, then after that, he was able to get their attention about how he could do something for their spiritual needs. And we not only want to help them as far as physically with this humanitarian project, but we're hoping that they will understand the message of the gospel. 40 families with 200 people. And we're going to be able to bring them clean water. And it's just the first. We can see from here. I'm 67 years old. I got a feeling that I'm going to spend the next several years of my life bringing water to places where they need to have it. And I'm excited about that. Wow. Could it be that when I was just a little boy and all this happened in Ecuador, could it be that God was saying, I'm going to take somebody from that family and years later I'm going to send him to be involved in this project? Thank you, my good buddy Dave Colonin. Thank you so much. You've been a mentor of me for over 50 years back in your days with the Couriers. But I want to tell you what a beautiful thing you've brought to my family and to me to be involved in this. Well, what about you? Do you have someone you need to forgive? Is it as challenging a situation as young Steve Saint faced? Or Elizabeth Elliott or her young daughter, these men that were gone? Let me ask you another question. You need to have forgiveness? Do you say, I need for God to forgive me, but what I've done is so wrong, it's so bad, there is absolutely nothing that could make the situation turn around for me. God won't forgive me. I've done too much wrong. Well, I'll tell you who disagrees with you, Paul the Apostle. He used to, for some time, kill Christians only because they were Christians. Because they followed Jesus, he was purposely having them put to death. And then later he realized how wrong he was. And he said, I tell you that Christ Jesus is able to save sinners, of whom I am chief. Paul said, if God could save me, he could save anybody. He killed people just because they were righteous. Well, he didn't know. He was wrong. Maybe you've been wrong about what you thought. Maybe the priorities of your life and the things that you have pursued and the goals that you've had, maybe they're wrong. But today God has said, hey, I've got a better plan. I have a plan of forgiveness. I have a plan of righteous living. I want to do something special in your life. Would you let him do that? Would you come and pray? We quote this scripture almost every week, but it says that Jesus said, whoever comes to me, I will in no wise cast out. I will not turn him away. I will accept him. He'll accept you. Would you pray with me? Father, we come to you and we ask that you forgive the sins of the person that's praying with me right now. They say, Lord, even if I've tried to live a good moral life, I realize there is that which I've done that's been displeasing to you. I want you to forgive me of all of my sins, every single sin of my entire life, that whole big inventory. Wipe it clean and forgive me, and I want to live for you. And they make that commitment to you now, Lord. Would you accept them? Would you let them feel the assurance that you have forgiven them? And give them the courage, Lord, to live for you, to study your word, to read the Bible, to pray and communicate with you every day, and to tell somebody about the decision that they've made. We thank you for it, Lord. Bless us, Lord, as we depart. And I pray, Lord, that you'll just help us in the days ahead to be able to do things in a way that bring honor and glory to your name. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you here next week at this time. God bless you.